So, quick update on this damper we're rebuilding. Cleaned it all up, checked all the parts. Some of them were a bit worse for wear. There's sort of bumps up top. I had to run the lathe over it, clean it up because it was very badly corroded. Took all the anodize of this and now tubes, got all the zinc coating gone now. But all in all, not too bad. So I can send some stuff off for zinc and gold passivate and some other stuff for anodize. And the biggest problem I found was with the bladder, the gas bladder. The edge where it seals looked a bit ropey, so I put it back together. Its tube, its top, gassed it up, and it's leaking, so that's no good. Couldn't really find a replacement easily, although it has a manufacturer number in it, and I'm sure you'll find one somewhere. But I decided to change to a piston type. So instead of having the bladder in here, I put a piston in, 2 O-rings on there. Piston goes in there, does the same thing. In fact, I find it a nicer system, and it helps me with bleeding the damper later on when we put it back together. It's easier to do with a piston. So that was the biggest problem. Got the adjuster out, as I said I would, and took the little bump adjuster apart. It is just a bleed adjuster. Bleed, so maybe talk quickly about the terminology of dampers. I think there are some sort of misconceptions or maybe misunderstandings. Bleed means fluid being able to pass across the piston, or in this case via the adjuster across from the main body to the gas canister. Fluid being able to pass there relatively freely, restricted by a needle, a little needle at the end. So basically you have a hole, oil can pass through, you stick a needle in the middle of the hole which is tapered, and when you wind it in further, less oil can pass, so it's harder for the oil to pass, and you wind it out to have a bigger hole, oil can pass freely. That's bleed. This damper has only got bleed adjusters. The other way some dampers have adjustment is preload. They find a way of preloading the shim stack on the piston, or they may have another shim stack in an adjuster, and or it may even just be a poppet valve with a spring behind it. So some kind of spring loaded area where oil has to pass through eventually. And generally bleed adjusters work most at low speed, or depending on, like this damper that has a lot of bleed, it works over the whole adjustment range. They obviously didn't put any preload adjusters on, so they wanted adjustment over the whole range. So where we have the adjusting the canister, I only adjust compression, because the only oil that goes in the canister is the oil that is displaced by the shaft. When the shaft goes into the damper, well, the volume of material that the shaft has to go somewhere, so it has to be displaced. So that goes into the canister. So that only happens on compression. So this adjuster, compression only. The needle valve that sits in the shaft, well, that allows oil to pass from below the piston. Piston sits here. So there's a hole in the shaft, allows oil from below the piston to pass across, come out a hole on either side. So that adjuster works over the whole range, and it works in both compression and rebound. Some of them have it a different arrangement. The needle, there might be a little check valve in there, so it only works in in rebound or only works in compression, or some from Koni, Penske, they have very clever bleed adjusters that are adjustable individually, but this one hasn't. Now, damping, and when people talk about damping, we talk about high-speed damping, low-speed damping. Well, I feel some people mistake that for high road speed and low road speed. It's not. It's shaft speed. So low-speed damping is what forces does the damper produce when the shaft moves slowly in and out, and high speed is when the shaft moves fast. I would say any shaft speed 0 to 50 millimeters per second I would class as low speed, and anything above 200 millimeters per second I class as high speed. Anything in between is just the average range where the damper will spend most of its time. So you can have a requirement for high speed damping at very low road speeds. If you hit a big bump at that moment in time, you get a lot of displacement, and that naturally means the damper accelerates very fast and reaches a very high peak velocity and then falls down again. So how can we change the level of damping? Well, there's obviously the adjusters, but if that range isn't enough or too much, the damper's too stiff and too soft, and you want to change the level of damping it provides, you can do it via the valves. The valves are formed by the piston and the shims. So obviously this stack on top, as I said before, goes like a Christmas tree. By that I mean you start with big, the first shim seals on the piston face, the 4 holes in this case. Oil sits underneath, damper is moving down, oil pressure goes up, lifts the shim, allows the oil to pass through. The stiffer I make that, the higher the forces are required to open the valve. Therefore, the more forces the damper is going to produce. Quite a simple system. So if you wanted to stiffen your damper up, you can put more shims in, you can put thicker shims in. Both works. There might be some constraints in terms of the stack height that you can achieve, so you might they generally come in 2 thou increments. They start at 4 thou, that's the thinnest shims you generally get, and then you can have a 6, an 8, a 10, a 12, a 15 and a 20. That's generally what you find you can get. Now 2 fours doesn't make an 8. 2 fours is softer than an 8. It's something like 2 fours are the equivalent of a 6. An 8 is probably 4 fours. So it's over a little bit. It's different from damper to damper, but it comes with experience of a certain damper. But certainly, now if you want to change the forces over the whole range of the damping, you stiffen up the biggest shim, or the bottom 2. That will stiffen up damping over the whole range from low speed up to high speed. If you want to stiffen up damping in the high speed range only, you would stiffen up the second or third to last shim, not the smallest one. The smallest one doesn't do anything. It's just a spacer. But you stiffen up, or you take the smallest one out and finish with the next one up. But you have to stiffen the smallest shims at the top of the tree up. That will stiffen up the top. If you want to stiffen up your damping in the middle, you got it. You stiffen up the shims in the middle, and therefore there's a good tunability, so you can get almost anything you want. What you can't do is, without changing things like pistons, you can't change the characteristics of a damper. So if this is a linear damper, meaning the forces progress linear over the range, they start low and it's almost a straight line up to the highest forces. That's determined by the piston and the piston shape. They're dished, they have a little dish on them, maybe 1 or 2 degrees, and this is clearly a linear piston, so linear in rebound, linear compression. You can get different pistons. Not all manufacturers do them for all dampers, but you can get digressive pistons, you can get blow-off pistons, and so provided you can get a piston, you can have, within reason, almost all characteristics you want to have. But most dampers are linear. I'd say 90% of everything that goes on a road-going vehicle, and even on race cars, are straight linear dampers. Nothing tricky. I thought I should briefly talk about dyno and why we dyno. This is a dyno graph from the other Showa damper I rebuilt. See, we've done it 3 times. First time in its stiffest setting, silhouette graph. Then I went halfway on the adjuster. It's a blue graph, and then the green is the full soft setting. Now I had 4 turns on the compression adjuster, and I had 3 turns on the top eye adjuster. So I did it at 0, which is full stiff, 1.5 and 2, and then 3 and 4. As you can see, pretty linear. You get more rebound than bump. That's quite normal. And this graph is force peak velocity. So on a dyno, it's a simple machine in principle. All it has is a load cell and a piston that moves in a controlled manner at a set frequency and a set stroke. So in this case, I think it's half an inch stroke, and the frequency, it takes a measurement. It runs it's at a slow frequency, let's say something like 0.2 hertz, a few strokes, takes a measurement, and then it speeds up, and at its fastest setting, it's, I don't know, maybe 3 hertz. And it converts that into millimeters per second shaft speed. And this graph is force versus peak velocity. So it's taking from each frequency the dyno has run, it's taking a measurement point at the highest velocity of the shaft and puts a data point, and then connects all the dots together, different frequencies, gives you your graph. Now, I need to talk about gas pressure for a moment, because again, I think there's a misconception what gas pressure does. It does nothing. Only function of the gas canister is to allow the displacement of the shaft. So the force that you feel when you press your damper in and when it returns by itself, it's not a damping force. It is a spring force. It is an offset. So if you have 80 newtons of gas force, means your spring rate is going to be an extra 80 newton in compression, and that's all it is. Changing the gas pressure does nothing as long as there's enough gas pressure in there. If you don't have enough, gas pressure does help the damper on when it changes direction. It changes the speed with which the valves close, the shims close. So it has a small function, but it's not important. It's a minor thing. As long as there's gas pressure that is sufficient, it doesn't matter if you put 5 bar in or 8 bar or 20 bar. Won't change a thing other than giving you more pressure, gives you a larger offset. So that's force peak velocity, and you can see we're measuring up to 250 millimeters per second, and maximum forces are about 2,200 Newton in rebound, and about 1,000 Newton in bump on the stiffest setting. Now you see down here, you see that curve is sort of a little bit flat, and then it sort of kicks up and then it kicks down again. That's bleed. Bleed adjusters are usually quite flat, not much progression, and then at this point the bleed stalls. There can't be any more fluid going, no more fluid can go through the hole, and the shims, the oil pressure has to overcome the shims. And there you have a little knee point, a tiny bit. It's not very pronounced in this damper at all. This is where the shims really start to work, and it's probably where that softer shim is in there, that smaller shim. It's probably at this point where that starts to be overcome, and the rest of the shim stack's working. Can't see it so much on compression. Interesting that the adjuster, the compression adjuster, at half its adjustment range is already pretty much at full soft. Going to its full is a minor change, not a lot. A little bit more on the little bit more effect on the rebound side, but yeah. So adjustment range is good because we're going from roughly 200 Newton to 1000 Newton, so you've got a good adjustment range, but it's a very, very sensitive adjuster. So the difference between half a turn makes a big difference. Now half a turn is 20% or so, 20-30% of difference. And the other graph we look at is this graph was a performance graph. Tells you damper is performing as it should. This one is force displacement, and that shows you it's exactly the same set of data, but instead of just taking data points, it sort of shows you complete loops every time the damper's going around, and then at the next lower frequency you get a slightly lower set of forces. And what we look at here is the most important bits are here. If the damper's got air in it, this wouldn't look very nice. We call that sort of an egg plot or a potato plot. It wants to look roughly like an egg. If the damper's got air in it, still you find it's very flat here and then jumps up, because every time it's changing direction, it has to kind of overcome the air. There will be no damping while there's air, and then it jumps up to the forces, which is also why you cannot tell by hand whether a damper is working or not, unless it's completely broken and has a lot of air in it, or something's gone completely wrong in there. You'd feel that. But a damper which has gone off a bit and has a bit of air in it, you won't feel that, because you're not able to push it by hand. This damper, I can push it when the adjusters are fully wound out. I can push it, but it's hard, and all you feel is the gas pressure. I mean, generally you can be fairly certain a damper is good when you've rebuilt it. You push it in with the adjuster that's soft. You push it in. You wait for the shaft to return, and if it returns with a positive stop at the end, so you put your finger on the top line as it returns. If it sort of bottoms out against the top, brilliant. That's a good sign. But you can't be sure. I would not rebuild a damper, and I've without exaggeration, I've done thousands of dampers, and I'd say 9 out of 10 I'll get it right, but 1 out of 10 something isn't quite right, and you don't feel it. There might be, maybe there's a little bit of dirt in there that you've missed and it sticks under the shims. You won't feel that. That's why it's important. By all means, rebuild your dampers. If you can, brilliant. I think everybody should have a go. Take it to somewhere where they have a dyno and get it dynoed. I've got a friend of mine, he does it for me. He charges people, I think, £30 for a set of dyno runs with a graph, and it's money well worth spending, because you won't be able to tell if they're right or not. Hope this helps, and I'll see you next time with the rebuild procedure and bleeding procedure for this Showa damper.